I was standing in my own kitchen, holding the anniversary cake I had paid $340 for, when my daughter-in-law announced to the entire room that there was no seat for the old leech at the head table because we don't have space for walking checkbooks. My son laughed. 24 hours later, they changed the locks on the house I still legally co-own and started the paperwork to have me declared incompetent. What they didn't know was that every single dollar I ever gave them had been meticulously documented, and my late husband's estate lawyer was already on speed dial. My name is Margaret Harlan. Most people call me Maggie. I turned 68 last spring, and for the 12 years since my husband Robert passed, I have been the quiet engine that kept my son Derek's household running. Not out of obligation, but out of love. Or at least what I thought was love. It started small. Derek and Vanessa were newlyweds, with big dreams and thin paychecks. Their first apartment rent was $1,400 a month. I covered the difference so they wouldn't stress. Then came the car note when Derek's transmission died. Then the down payment on the 3-bedroom colonial on Maplewood Drive, the house I still co-own because Robert's will required my name stay on the deed until the mortgage was paid in full. I never minded. I liked being needed. I liked hearing Vanessa say, "You're a lifesaver, Mom," even if her smile never quite reached her eyes. Over 12 years, the numbers added up with cold precision. Mortgage assistance, $1,850 a month for 144 months. That's $266,400 right there. Then property taxes, insurance, 2 new roofs, HVAC replacements, the private school tuition for my grandchildren, $8,000 a year each for 6 years, car repairs, medical deductibles, the backyard deck they had to have for entertaining, every wire transfer, every check, every Venmo request. I kept the records. Robert had drilled that into me. Paper trail, Maggie, always. I thought I was protecting them. Turns out, I was building my own case file. The night of their 10th anniversary party, I arrived early, like always. I had spent the afternoon baking the red velvet cake from scratch because Vanessa once mentioned it was her favorite. $340 on ingredients, fondant, and the custom topper that read, 10 years of forever. I carried it through the side door, the one I still had a key for, and set it on the granite island I had paid to install. Voices drifted from the dining room. I recognized Vanessa's sharp laugh, then Derek's deeper chuckle. I was about to call out when I heard my name. "Why is that old leech here again?" Vanessa said, loud enough for the whole kitchen wing to hear. "We don't have space for her at the head table. She's just the walking checkbook. Let her sit at the kids' table with the plastic forks." Someone gasped, then laughed. Derek's laugh joined in. "Babe, come on. She means well. Just keep her away from the good wine. Last time she talked about Dad's will for 20 minutes. I stood frozen, the cake knife still in my hand. My reflection in the stainless steel fridge looked suddenly old, tired, disposable. 12 years of canceled checks flashed through my mind like a ledger on fire. $266,000 on the mortgage alone, another $43,000 on school, $28,000 on cars. The list kept scrolling. And here I was, reduced to the old leech. I didn't cry, not then. I simply set the cake down, walked back out the side door, and drove home in silence. The next morning I drove back at 7:30, planning to talk to them calmly, like adults. My key didn't turn. The deadbolt had been changed. A bright yellow note was taped inside the storm door, visible from the porch. "Mom, we need space. Please respect our boundaries. We'll call when things settle." I stood on my own porch, because the deed still listed Margaret R. Harlan and Derek T. Harlan as joint owners, and felt something inside me click into place. Not anger exactly. Clarity. Cold, bank statement clarity. I called my late husband's estate attorney, Harold Whitaker, before I even left the driveway. He answered on the second ring. "Maggie, it's been a while. Everything all right?" "No, Harold, it's not. I need to see you today. Bring every file we have on Robert's estate and the Maplewood property. And I want a forensic accountant on standby." By 10 a.m., I was sitting in Harold's downtown office with 12 years of bank statements spread across the mahogany table like evidence at a crime scene. He whistled low when he saw the totals. $187,000 in direct transfers alone, Maggie. Not counting the joint accounts you let them access. And the deed still has your name on it. I know, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. They changed the locks this morning, and I overheard them last night calling me a leech. Harold leaned back. You want to evict them? I want what's mine, and I want them to understand that money doesn't come with an endless tap. He nodded once. First thing, we file a notice of intent to partition the property. Since you're on the deed, you can force a sale or buy them out. Second, we freeze any remaining joint access immediately. Third, we start documenting everything for a potential financial abuse claim. Because changing locks on a co-owner without notice? That's trespass territory. I left his office with a game plan and a new set of house keys for my own home. The modest two-bedroom I had kept after Robert died. The one I never sold because I thought Derek might need it someday. Turns out, the only person who needed protecting was me. That afternoon, I drove to the bank where I had made every transfer for 12 years. Mr. Ellison, the branch manager who had known me since Robert's funeral, met me in his office. Mrs. Harlan, I see you want to close the joint account and cancel all standing instructions. Yes, and I want a full transaction history printed for the last 15 years. Every penny. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and started typing. When the printer finished, the stack was 3 inches thick. I signed where he pointed and walked out with my money finally, truly mine again. By evening, I had a locksmith at my own front door installing a smart lock with cameras. I also had a security system quote for the Maplewood house, the one I still owned half of. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, I would start acting like one. The first text from Derek came at 6:47 p.m. Mom, the new keys aren't working. Did you do something? I stared at the screen for a long minute, then typed back the first honest sentence I had sent in years. Yes, I changed the locks on my half of the responsibilities. We need to talk. Tomorrow. My lawyer's office, 10 a.m. The typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, this is crazy. You're overreacting. We were joking last night. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the folder Harold had given me and started highlighting every transfer marked gift to Derek and Vanessa. The numbers didn't lie, and neither would I anymore. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in months without checking my phone for emergency requests. No more, Mom, the water heater died at 2 a.m. No more, can you spot us until payday? No more pretending that love could be measured in direct deposits. The old Maggie, the one who baked cakes and swallowed insults, was gone. In her place was a woman who finally understood the difference between generosity and exploitation. And tomorrow, in Harold Whitaker's conference room, my son and daughter-in-law were going to learn exactly how expensive that lesson was going to be. The next morning, I arrived at Harold Whitaker's office at 9:45 sharp, carrying the 3-inch stack of bank records like armor. Derek and Vanessa were already in the waiting room. Derek wore the navy blazer I had bought him for his last promotion interview. Vanessa had on the diamond studs Robert's estate had paid for 2 Christmases ago. They both looked rattled. Mom, this is ridiculous, Derek started the second I walked in. You can't just... Harold's receptionist cut him off politely. Mr. Whitaker will see you all now. We filed into the conference room. Harold sat at the head of the long table, flanked by a forensic accountant named Claire Ramirez and a paralegal with a digital recorder. The moment we sat, Harold slid a single sheet across to Derek and Vanessa. This is a formal notice of partition action on the Maplewood property. Since Margaret Harlan remains a co-owner of record, she has the legal right to force the sale or buy out your interest. Effective immediately, all access to the property is restricted until a court determines equitable division. Vanessa's face went white. You can't do that. We live there. You changed the locks on my client yesterday morning, Harold said calmly. That constitutes trespass on jointly owned real estate. We also have reason to believe you've been accessing joint financial instruments without full disclosure. Derek leaned forward, trying the tone that used to work on me. Mom, we were joking. It was a stressful night. The party planning got out of hand. I looked at him the way I used to look at him when he was 10 and lied about breaking the garage window. I heard every word, Derek. Old leech, walking checkbook. You laughed. Vanessa tried the soft approach. We love you. You know that. We just need a little more time to get on our feet. I slid my own folder across the table. 12 years of canceled checks, wire confirmations, school tuition receipts, and mortgage statements stared back at them in neat columns. $187,412.63, I said. That's what I transferred directly into your lives since your father died. Not loans, not investments, gifts. And every single one is documented because your father taught me never to give blindly. Claire Ramirez opened her laptop. We've also identified a home equity line of credit opened 3 months ago in the amount of $45,000. The signature on the application appears to be forged. Derek's head snapped up. That's impossible. Claire turned the screen so they could see the magnified signature. We've requested forensic handwriting analysis. The bank has already frozen the line pending investigation. Any funds dispersed will need to be repaid with interest and penalties. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. We were going to tell you. We had some unexpected bills. Unexpected bills don't require forging my name, I replied. My voice stayed even, the same tone I used when I balanced the household checkbook for 40 years. And they certainly don't require trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. Harold slid the next document forward. We received notice yesterday afternoon that you consulted an attorney to petition for emergency guardianship of your mother on grounds of alleged cognitive decline. The filing includes a statement claiming she has been making irrational financial decisions. Derek shifted in his chair. We were worried. You've been distant lately. Distant? I almost laughed. I stopped answering calls at 2 a.m. asking for rent money. That's not decline, that's boundaries. Harold continued as if reading from a script he had written many times before. The court has scheduled an emergency hearing for next Wednesday. We will be opposing the petition with full documentation of Mrs. Harlan's financial competence, including recent cognitive screening results she voluntarily completed yesterday afternoon. I hadn't mentioned the cognitive test to them. I had walked into a neurologist's office right after the bank, answered every question, drew the clock, recalled the words, counted backward by sevens. The doctor's report was already in Harold's folder. No evidence of cognitive impairment. Patient demonstrates excellent executive function and financial literacy for her age. Vanessa's eyes darted between the papers and my face. You're really doing this? After everything we've been through as a family? Everything we've been through, I repeated slowly. Included me eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner some months so I could cover your mortgage when Derek's commission check was short. It included me canceling my own hip replacement consult because the deductible would have left you short on tuition. It included me sitting alone on Christmas Eve last year while you posted pictures of the perfect family holiday I paid for but wasn't invited to attend. The room went quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Harold spoke again. Here is what is going to happen. Mrs. Harlan is prepared to settle this matter outside of full litigation if you agree to 3 conditions. 1. Immediate repayment of the $45,000 HELOC with all accrued interest and fees. 2. A structured repayment plan for at least $100,000 of the documented gifts, treated as loans for tax purposes. 3. You vacate the Maplewood property within 60 days so it can be listed for sale, with proceeds divided according to ownership interest after mortgage satisfaction. Derek's face flushed red. You want us to pay you back for helping your own grandchildren? That's cold, Mom. No, I said. What's cold is changing the locks on the house I still own and then trying to take the rest of my retirement through the court system. I'm not asking for every penny. I'm asking for enough so I can stop being your safety net and start being a person again. Vanessa stood up so fast her chair scraped. This is blackmail. Harold's voice stayed level. "This is accountability. You have until close of business Friday to respond in writing." After that, we proceed to the hearing and to the partition suit, and Mrs. Harlan has authorized security cameras at the Maplewood property. Any attempt to remove belongings without coordination will be treated as theft. I rose as well. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't wait for them to dismiss me. I simply gathered my copies, nodded once to Harold, and walked out. In the parking lot, Derek caught up to me, grabbing my elbow the way he did when he was a teenager, trying to talk me out of grounding him. "Mom, please. Think about the kids. They'll be devastated." I looked at his hand on my arm until he let go. "I have thought about the kids," I said. "Every single time I wrote another check. From now on, I will think about them through a trust that neither of you can touch. And I will think about myself for the first time since your father died." I got in my car and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. That afternoon, I met with the security company at the Maplewood house. The technician installed 4 exterior cameras and a doorbell cam while I stood on the lawn I had paid to sod 6 years earlier. Neighbors watched from across the street. I didn't wave. I simply signed the work order and drove home. By evening, my phone had 37 missed calls between Derek and Vanessa. I let them all go to voicemail. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened the folder again. $187,000. 12 years. Countless canceled plans, postponed doctor visits, quiet evenings alone so they could have the life they wanted. I picked up the phone one last time that night and called my sister in Florida. "Louise," I said when she answered, "remember that river cruise we talked about 10 years ago? The one down the Danube?" She laughed softly. "You always said you couldn't go because Derek might need you." "I'm going," I told her. "But first, I have to finish something here." I hung up and looked at the calendar on the wall. Wednesday's hearing was circled in red. Below it, in fresh blue ink, I wrote 2 more dates. The day the house would go on the market, and the day I would board a plane to Europe with no return ticket for at least 6 weeks. For the first time in 12 years, the future felt like it belonged to me again. And on Wednesday, in a family court hearing room, my son and daughter-in-law were about to learn just how expensive just joking had become. The emergency hearing was set for Wednesday at 9 a.m. in Family Courtroom 214. I arrived at 8:15 with Harold Whitaker, Claire Ramirez, the forensic accountant, and a thick binder labeled Harlan Financial Records, 2014 to present. Derek and Vanessa showed up at 8:50 with their attorney, a slick man in his 40s named Richard Lang, who specialized in elder law cases and carried himself like he had already won. We filed into the small courtroom. The judge, Honorable Elena Vargas, was already on the bench reviewing files. She looked over her glasses at both tables and nodded once. Petitioners Derek and Vanessa Harlan versus respondent Margaret Harlan. Petition for emergency guardianship on grounds of alleged mental decline and financial mismanagement. Counsel, let's begin. Lang stood first. His voice was smooth, practiced. Your Honor, Mrs. Harlan is 68 years old and has recently exhibited concerning behavioral changes. She has abruptly cut off long-standing financial support to her only son and his family, changed the locks on a jointly owned residence without notice, and installed surveillance equipment. We have a statement from a licensed geriatric specialist, Dr. Alan Pierce, who reviewed the situation and believes Mrs. Harlan may be suffering from early cognitive impairment exacerbated by isolation and grief over her late husband. He slid a single-page report across. I caught the words paranoid behavior and irrational withdrawal of support. Harold rose without being asked. Your Honor, we oppose the petition in its entirety. Mrs. Harlan voluntarily underwent a full cognitive evaluation yesterday with board-certified neurologist Dr. Sarah Klein. The report, which we are submitting now, shows superior executive function, intact memory, and no signs of impairment. Furthermore, the so-called abrupt cutoff is actually the termination of 12 years of voluntary gifts totaling $187,412. Judge Vargas raised an eyebrow. That's a significant figure, Mr. Whitaker. Yes, Your Honor. We have every canceled check, wire transfer confirmation, and bank statement. We also have evidence that the petitioners opened a $45,000 home equity line of credit 3 months ago using what appears to be a forged signature of my client. Lang jumped in. Objection! That is a separate civil matter and has not been proven. Overruled for now, the judge said. Continue. Derek was called to the stand first. He looked nervous, but tried to sound concerned. Mom has always been generous, but lately she's been different. She stopped answering our calls, accused us of things that never happened, and now she wants to sell the house we've lived in for 10 years. We're worried she's not thinking clearly. Lang asked the next question. Has your mother ever shown signs of confusion with money? Derek hesitated, then nodded. She mixed up account numbers a few times, and she started questioning every expense, even normal family things. I sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table. Claire Ramirez passed me a note. He's lying about the account numbers. We have the logs. When it was my turn, I walked to the witness stand without hesitation. Judge Vargas looked at me directly. Mrs. Harlan, would you like to address the court? Yes, Your Honor. My voice was calm, the same tone I used when I taught Sunday school for 30 years. I am not confused. I am finished being used. For 12 years, I paid the mortgage on a house I still co-own. I paid private school tuition, car repairs, medical bills, and countless emergencies. In return, I was called an old leech at their 10th anniversary party. The next day, they changed the locks. The day after that, they filed this petition. If that is mental decline, then protecting myself must be a symptom. Lang cross-examined me. Mrs. Harlan, isn't it true you once told your son you would always take care of him? I said I would help him become independent, not finance his adulthood indefinitely. There is a difference. He tried again. And the home equity line, you're claiming forgery without proof? I'm claiming the bank has already frozen the account and ordered handwriting analysis. The signature does not match any of my verified documents from the last 10 years. Judge Vargas interrupted. Mr. Lang, do you have any additional witnesses? Lang called Dr. Alan Pierce. The man was smooth, expensive suit, rehearsed answers. He spoke about classic signs of financial elder abuse reversal and sudden hostility toward family. He never once examined me in person. Harold cross-examined him for less than 4 minutes. Doctor, did you ever meet Mrs. Harlan? No, but I reviewed the provided statements. So your opinion is based entirely on information given to you by the petitioners? Well, yes. And are you aware that Mrs. Harlan scored in the 98th percentile on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment administered yesterday? The doctor shifted. I was not provided that report. Harold submitted it. The courtroom was quiet while the judge read the 2-page summary. Then Claire Ramirez took the stand. She walked the court through the numbers with the precision of a surgeon. Over 12 years, Mrs. Harlan transferred $187,412 directly to the petitioners or on their behalf. In addition, she co-signed the original mortgage and remains on the deed. 3 months ago, a home equity line was opened with a forged signature. Bank security footage from the signing appointment shows only Derek Harlan and Vanessa Harlan present. Mrs. Harlan was in physical therapy that day for a knee injury. We have the medical records and time-stamped video from the clinic. Derek's face went pale. Vanessa stared at the table. Judge Vargas leaned forward. Ms. Ramirez, are you telling this court the petitioners forged Mrs. Harlan's signature on a loan secured by jointly owned property? Yes, Your Honor. The forensic handwriting expert will confirm it next week, but the preliminary bank review already flags it as suspicious. The judge looked at Lang. Counsel, do you wish to respond? Lang conferred quickly with Derek and Vanessa, then stood. Your Honor, my clients were under the impression that Mrs. Harlan had authorized the line. There may have been a miscommunication. Miscommunication does not explain a forged signature, Judge Vargas said sharply. She tapped her gavel once. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. Mrs. Harlan has demonstrated full capacity. The matter of the forged HELOC is referred to the district attorney for investigation. The partition action on the Maplewood property will proceed on the expedited calendar. Petitioners are ordered to vacate the premises within 45 days or face contempt. Any further harassment or attempts to access Mrs. Harlan's accounts will result in immediate restraining orders. She looked directly at Derek and Vanessa. Let me be clear. This court does not look kindly on adult children who treat their parents as unlimited ATMs and then cry foul when the tap is turned off. Mrs. Harlan, you are free to manage your affairs as you see fit. I felt the weight lift off my chest, like someone had opened a vault door I had been leaning against for years. As we left the courtroom, Derek tried to approach me in the hallway. A bailiff stepped between us before he could speak. Harold had already requested the temporary restraining order that morning. It was granted on the spot. That evening, I sat in my quiet living room with a single glass of the Cabernet I had bought for myself instead of their anniversary wine. The security app on my phone showed the Maplewood house dark and empty of movement. No more surprise visits. No more midnight calls. I opened my laptop and booked the first leg of the river cruise, a 14-night Danube sailing departing in 9 weeks. Cabin with balcony. No Wi-Fi package. I wanted silence. Then I called my sister Louise again. I won the first round, I told her. They have 45 days to leave the house. The judge denied their guardianship petition and flagged the forgery for criminal review. Louise whistled. You sound different, Maggie. Stronger. I am different, I said. I finally stopped paying for a love that was never there. Now I'm going to pay for the life I postponed. Before bed, I opened the trust documents Harold had prepared. The Harlan Grandchildren Trust. Irrevocable. Funded with $50,000 from the eventual house sale proceeds. Derek and Vanessa could never touch it. My grandchildren would receive it at 25, with stipends for college if they maintained contact with me directly, not through their parents. I signed the last page with a steady hand. 12 years of being the walking checkbook had ended in a courtroom in under 3 hours. The old Maggie who baked cakes and swallowed insults was gone for good. In 45 days, the house on Maplewood would go on the market. In 9 weeks, I would be sailing through Europe with no one left to call me an old leech. And for the first time since Robert died, the future felt wide open instead of drained dry. The 45-day clock started ticking the moment Judge Vargas denied the guardianship petition. Derek and Vanessa wasted no time testing the edges of the temporary restraining order. On day 3, they showed up at the Maplewood house with a moving truck and 2 of Vanessa's brothers. The new security cameras caught every second. I was in Harold's office when the alert hit my phone. 4 figures on the porch, Derek trying his old key, then pounding on the door. The doorbell camera recorded Vanessa's voice clearly. She can't do this. It's our home. Call the police and say she's locked us out. Harold smiled without humor. They just violated the order. I'll have the contempt motion filed before lunch. By 2 p.m., a sheriff's deputy was at the Maplewood house serving them written notice. They left empty-handed, but not before Derek looked straight into the camera and muttered, "This isn't over, Mom." It was only beginning. We spent the next 3 weeks building the partition case like a fortress. Claire Ramirez brought in the bank's fraud investigator, a quiet woman named Teresa Langdon, who had reviewed the HELOC paperwork. Her sworn affidavit was devastating. The signature was forged, the notary who witnessed it had been paid cash by Vanessa, and the loan proceeds, $38,000 after fees, had been wired to an account in Derek's name the same afternoon. Harold also subpoenaed their joint credit card statements. The pattern was unmistakable. Every time I had slowed the transfers in the past year, new charges appeared. Luxury dinners, a weekend in Napa, even a new espresso machine for the kitchen I had already paid to renovate twice. They had been living on the expectation that the money would never stop. On day 29, the permanent restraining order hearing was held. This time, the courtroom was the same, but the energy had shifted. Derek and Vanessa sat at the petitioner's table, looking smaller. Their attorney, Richard Lang, had that tight-jawed look lawyers get when they know the facts are against them. I took the stand again. This time, I didn't wait for questions. Your Honor, I spent 12 years believing that if I gave enough, I would be loved. Instead, I was tolerated until the moment I said no. They changed the locks on a house I still own. They forged my name on a loan. They tried to have me declared incompetent so they could finish draining what's left of my retirement. I am not asking for revenge. I am asking for the law to do what my own family refused to do. Protect me from further harm. Judge Vargas listened without interrupting. When Lang tried to paint me as bitter and estranged, she cut him off. Counsel, the evidence before this court shows systematic financial exploitation, not estrangement. The forged loan alone is enough for criminal referral. The permanent restraining order was granted on the spot. Derek and Vanessa were prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or any property I owned. Any violation would mean jail time. As we left the courthouse, Vanessa tried one last time. She broke away from Derek and walked toward me, tears already forming. Mom, please. The kids miss you. We all miss you. I stopped but didn't turn fully. The kids have my number. They can call me directly. You cannot. And the next time you need money, remember the word you used in your own kitchen. Leech. That's exactly what you turned me into. She stood there crying as the bailiff escorted them away. I felt nothing but the clean weight of finality. Day 37 brought the real blow, the one that turned their panic into desperation. Claire had been working with the district attorney's office on the forgery case. On a Tuesday morning, she called me at 7:15. Maggie, they just executed a search warrant at the Maplewood house. They found the original HELOC application with your forged signature in a notepad where Vanessa had practiced writing your name. Multiple times. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. So it's criminal now. Felony forgery and attempted financial exploitation of an elder. Derek is looking at 3 to 5 years if convicted. Vanessa, because she orchestrated the notary, could face the same. I didn't celebrate. I simply felt the last chain snap. That same afternoon, Harold filed the motion to accelerate the partition sale. The court agreed. The Maplewood house would be listed within 10 days. Appraisers came through while Derek and Vanessa were still packing under police supervision. The valuation came back at $785,000. After the remaining mortgage of $212,000, my half would be roughly $286,500. More than enough to replenish what I had lost and fund the life I had deferred for 12 years. The night before the listing went live, Derek called from an unknown number. The restraining order allowed emergency contact through attorneys only, but he tried anyway. Mom, I'm sorry. We were stupid. We took you for granted. Please, don't sell the house. It's the only home the kids have ever known. I let the silence stretch. Then I answered with the same calm I had found in the courtroom. You made it clear it was never my home. It was your ATM with walls. Now it's going to be someone else's. And the money from my share will finally go where it belongs. To me. He started to cry. Real tears. The kind I had heard only when he was small and truly scared. For a moment, the old Maggie flickered. The one who would have driven over with soup and forgiveness. But I remembered the kitchen, the cake, the word leech, the changed locks, the forged signature, the guardianship filing. I hung up without another word. The house went on the market on a Friday. By Sunday, there were 3 full-price offers. We accepted the cleanest one, cash, 30-day close. Derek and Vanessa were given 24 hours to vacate after the papers were signed. They left in a rented U-Haul, taking the furniture I had paid for, the appliances I had replaced, even the custom blinds from the living room I had never been invited to sit in. I did not go to watch them leave. Instead, I drove to the cemetery and sat beside Robert's headstone for the first time in months without guilt weighing me down. Robert, I whispered, I finally stopped paying for the illusion of family. It hurt more than I expected, but it feels clean now. Like I can breathe again. The wind moved through the oak trees above us. I took it as his quiet approval. Closing day was quiet. I signed the papers at the title company, transferred my half of the proceeds into a new account at a different bank, and wired $50,000 straight into the grandchildren's trust. The rest, $286,000 after fees, sat in my name alone for the first time in over a decade. That evening, I met Louise at the airport hotel. She flew in just to see me off. We had dinner in the hotel restaurant, and for once, I ordered the most expensive thing on the menu without checking the price. "You look 10 years younger," she said, raising her glass. "I feel 20 years freer," I answered. 9 days later, I stood on the deck of the river ship MS Mozart as it pulled away from the dock in Budapest. The Danube glittered under the morning sun. My cabin was small, but mine. No one to ask for money, no one to call me a leech, no one to change the locks on my piece. I turned my phone to airplane mode, slipped it into the drawer, and watched the Hungarian countryside slide past. Somewhere behind me, Derek and Vanessa were learning to live within their means for the first time. My grandchildren would still know their grandmother, but on my terms, through letters, video calls I initiated, and a trust they could never weaponize. I had walked into that anniversary party as the family ATM. I sailed down the Danube as Margaret Harlan, retired, solvent, and finally, completely free. The old life was gone. The new one tasted like clean river air and second chances, and I intended to breathe every single breath of it. The river cruise was everything I had postponed for 12 years, 14 nights gliding through Budapest, Bratislava, Vienna, and the Wachau Valley. I woke each morning to the soft hum of the engines and the smell of fresh coffee in the lounge. No frantic texts asking for rent. No guilt about spending $28 on a glass of local Riesling. Just me, a notebook, and the quiet decision to write the next chapter of my life without subtracting from it first. But freedom has a way of making old wounds surface at the strangest times. On the 6th night, somewhere between Melk and Linz, my phone, which I had kept in airplane mode except for Wi-Fi calls to Louise, buzzed with an email from Harold Whitaker. Subject: Urgent update. Criminal charges filed. I stepped onto the private balcony, the cool night air off the Danube brushing my face, and opened the message. Maggie, the district attorney has formally charged Derek Harlan and Vanessa Harlan with felony forgery, financial exploitation of an elder, and attempted grand theft by false pretenses. The forged HELOC alone carries a maximum of 5 years. They were arrested this morning at their temporary apartment. Bail was set at $50,000 each. They are currently using a public defender. The DA wants your victim impact statement. I can draft it for you, but you may want to write it yourself. Also, the partition sale closed cleanly. Your net proceeds of $286,412.17 are now sitting in the new account. The Grandchildren's Trust is fully funded and irrevocable. Call when you can. The criminal case will move faster than expected because the evidence is overwhelming. Harold. I read the email twice, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. I expected to feel triumph. Instead, I felt a heavy, tired kind of sadness. The kind that comes when you finally admit the child you raised is capable of committing a felony against you. I leaned on the railing and watched the lights of a small Austrian village slide past. Somewhere back home, my son was sitting in a holding cell because he had forged his mother's name to keep the lifestyle I had subsidized. The same son I once carried through the night when he had croup. The same son who had laughed when his wife called me a leech. I didn't cry. I simply made a decision right there under the stars. I would write the victim impact statement, but I would not beg the court for mercy on his behalf. That era was over. The next morning, I sat in the ship's library with a cup of strong black coffee and wrote the statement in longhand on the ship's stationery. To the court. My name is Margaret Harlan. For 12 years after my husband's death, I voluntarily transferred $187,412 to my son Derek and daughter-in-law Vanessa to help them establish a stable home. I did so out of love, not obligation. In return, I was excluded from family events, spoken of as the old leech and walking checkbook. had the locks changed on a house I co-owned, and became the target of a guardianship petition designed to seize my remaining assets. When I finally set boundaries, they responded by forging my signature on a $45,000 home equity line of credit secured against that same jointly owned property. They then spent the proceeds on luxuries while continuing to pressure me for more. This was not a mistake born of desperation. It was a calculated continuation of 12 years of exploitation. I asked the court to impose the maximum sentence allowed so that other elderly parents understand they have the right and the power to say no without fear of retaliation or legal manipulation. I sign this not in anger, but in the hope that my grandchildren will learn that love cannot be bought, rented, or stolen. Margaret R. Harlan. I scanned it with the ship's business center and emailed it to Harold before the ship docked in Vienna. Then I turned the phone off again and joined a small group tour of Schönbrunn Palace. I walked the gardens without once checking my messages. For the first time in my adult life, my son's crisis was not my emergency. The cruise ended in Passau. I flew home business class, another first, and landed on a crisp October morning. Harold met me at the airport with the final financial summary. "The criminal case is set for plea negotiations next month," he said as we drove toward my small condo. "The DA is offering Derek 3 years probation with restitution if he pleads guilty and testifies against Vanessa on the notary fraud. Vanessa is facing the full 5. They're both fighting it, but the evidence is ironclad." I nodded. "And the house money?" "Already transferred. Your new balance is $286,412.17. The trust is locked. Your monthly expenses are now covered comfortably by your pension and the interest from the new account. You are, for all practical purposes, untouchable." I smiled for the first time since reading the arrest email. "Good. Then let's finish this the right way." 2 weeks later, I drove to the county jail visitation room. Derek had requested to see me. The restraining order had been modified by the court to allow 1 supervised visit for restitution discussions. I sat behind the glass, hands folded, and waited. He looked thinner, eyes hollow. The orange jumpsuit made him look younger and older at the same time. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was stupid." We both were. Vanessa pushed the loan idea. I went along. I never thought it would go this far. I looked at him steadily. "You changed the locks on my house. You called me a leech in front of your friends. You tried to have me declared incompetent. Then you forged my name on a loan." "Stupid doesn't cover that, Derek." He pressed his palm against the glass. "Please, talk to the DA. Tell them I'm your son. I can't do prison time. The kids need me." I kept my hands in my lap. "The kids need stability and honest parents. They will have access to the trust I set up, money that neither of you can touch. They can call me any time. But you and Vanessa made your choices. Now you face the consequences." Tears ran down his face. "You're really going to let me go to prison?" "I'm not sending you anywhere," I said quietly. "You sent yourself. The same way you sent me into 12 years of silent sacrifice. The difference is, I'm finally choosing myself." I stood up. The visit was over. As I walked out of the jail into the autumn sunlight, I felt the last heavy chain fall away. Not with joy, but with the clean, quiet dignity of a woman who had finally balanced the books. The plea deal was accepted 3 weeks later. Derek received 3 years probation, 5,000 hours of community service, and full restitution of the $45,000 plus interest to be paid from any future earnings. Vanessa took the 5-year sentence, eligible for parole after 2 with good behavior. The judge ordered both to stay away from me, permanently, except through attorneys for restitution matters. I sold my old condo and bought a small lakefront cottage 2 hours north. 1 bedroom, a screened porch, and a dock where I could sit with coffee and watch the water. I furnished it with money that had never been earmarked for anyone else. No guest room, no space for unexpected visitors. On the first night in my new home, I sat on the porch with a glass of the same Cabernet I had once bought for their anniversary. The lake was still and dark, reflecting the stars. My phone, now on a new number only Louise and my grandchildren knew, stayed silent. I opened the notebook I had carried on the cruise and wrote the final entry. Today, I closed the last chapter of Being the Family ATM. I paid $187,412 in unconditional love that was never returned. I recovered $286,412 in cash and dignity. The profit was peace. From now on, the only person whose emergencies I answer is me. The only locks I change are the ones that protect my own front door. And the only person I will ever call family again is the one I see in the mirror every morning. The woman who finally learned that saying no is not cruelty, it is survival. I closed the notebook, took a long sip of wine, and listened to the loons calling across the water. Margaret Harlan was no longer walking anyone's checkbook. She was simply walking forward, light, solvent, and finally completely free. The restitution hearing was the last time I had to sit in the same room as my son and daughter-in-law. It took place on a cold January morning, 6 weeks after I moved into the lake cottage. The courtroom was smaller this time, almost intimate, with only the judge, the prosecutor, Harold, and the court reporter present. Derek and Vanessa were brought in separately. Derek wore a cheap suit that didn't fit anymore. Vanessa wore an orange jumpsuit because she was still in custody pending sentencing. They both looked at me with the same hollow expression I had seen through the jail glass. The prosecutor read the final accounting aloud. Pursuant to the plea agreement, Derek Harlan owes full restitution of $45,000 on the forged HELOC, plus 12% interest from the date of disbursement, totaling $51,863. Vanessa Harlan is jointly liable. Additionally, the court has reviewed Mrs. Margaret Harlan's documented gifts over 12 years, totaling $187,412. While these were originally gifts, the pattern of exploitation and subsequent criminal conduct supports treating $50,000 of that amount as repayable loans for purposes of this restitution order. The judge looked over his glasses at them. "Do either of you have anything to say before I issue the final order?" Derek cleared his throat. His voice cracked. "Your Honor, I know we messed up. I just want to say to my mom that I'm sorry. We took her for granted. I never meant for it to go this far." Vanessa stared straight ahead, jaw tight, saying nothing. I was not asked to speak, but the judge turned to me anyway. "Mrs. Harlan, is there anything you wish the court to consider before final judgment?" I stood slowly. My hands were steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I do not ask for their imprisonment beyond what has already been decided. I do ask that the restitution be enforced strictly and that any future contact be limited to court-ordered payments only. I have set up an irrevocable trust for my grandchildren that their parents cannot access. That is the only financial legacy I will leave through them. For myself, I ask only to be left in peace." The judge nodded once, then read the order. Restitution in the amount of $101,863 is hereby ordered, payable at a minimum of $800 per month from any wages or windfalls received by either defendant. Any default will result in revocation of probation and immediate incarceration. A permanent no-contact order is issued except through counsel for payment purposes. Mrs. Harlan retains full ownership rights to any remaining assets and is under no obligation to provide further support. He banged the gavel. "This matter is closed." Derek tried to catch my eye as the bailiff led them away. I looked at him for a long second, then turned and walked out without a word. Outside in the hallway, Harold shook my hand. "It's over, Maggie. Legally, financially, and emotionally. You won every round." I smiled, but it was a small, tired smile. I didn't win, Harold. I just stopped losing. That afternoon, I drove back to the lake cottage through light snow. The house was warm when I arrived. I had left the heat on low. I made a cup of tea, sat on the screened porch, wrapped in the cashmere throw I had bought in Vienna, and opened my notebook one last time. I wrote, "Today the court made it official. They owe me $101,863. I will never see most of it. But the real restitution is this. I no longer flinch when the phone rings. I no longer calculate every dollar against their needs. I no longer apologize for existing in my own life. The old ledger is closed. The new one has only one name on it. Mine. I closed the notebook and set it on the small table beside the porch swing. The lake was frozen at the edges, but in the center, dark water still moved under the ice. Life going on beneath the surface, quiet and unstoppable. 3 months later, on a perfect April morning, I stood on the dock in a light jacket, watching the sun rise over the water. My phone, the new one with the private number, rang. It was my granddaughter, Sophie, 12 years old. Grandma? Dad said we're not supposed to call you, but I found your new number in Mom's old phone. Is it okay if I talk to you? I smiled into the cool air. It's more than okay, sweetheart. You can call me anytime. How are you? We talked for 43 minutes. She told me about school, about missing the old house, about how quiet everything was now that her parents were fighting all the time. I listened without offering money or solutions, just presence. When she asked if she could come visit during summer break, I said yes, but only if her parents agreed in writing through Harold, and only for 1 week at a time. She agreed. No pressure, no guilt. After we hung up, I walked back inside and opened the trust portal on my laptop. The balance had already grown with the first interest payment. My grandchildren would have options I never gave their parents. Money that could not be gambled, spent on luxuries, or used as leverage. I closed the laptop and stepped back onto the porch. The loons were calling again, their voices echoing across the still water. I had spent 12 years as the family safety net. I had spent the last 6 months cutting every rope. Now I stood on solid ground that belonged only to me. No more late-night transfers, no more changed locks. No more courtroom battles over who I was allowed to be. Just mornings on the porch, afternoons on the water, and evenings where the only voice I answered was my own. Margaret Harlan had finally balanced the books, and the profit was a life that no one could ever take from her again. The summer Sophie came to visit marked the true beginning of my new life. She arrived on a bright June morning with one small suitcase and a nervous smile. Harold had drawn up the paperwork. Her parents signed it under protest, but they signed. 1 week. No extensions. No financial discussions. Just grandmother and granddaughter. I picked her up at the bus station in my new silver SUV. Paid for with cash from the house sale. No co-signers, no guilt. Sophie hugged me tight the moment she saw me, then pulled back, studying my face as if making sure I was still the same woman who used to sneak her extra cookies. "You look different, Grandma," she said as we drove toward the lake. "Like, lighter." I laughed softly. That's because I finally put down a very heavy bag I'd been carrying for 12 years. The cottage surprised her. No big formal dining room, no guest wing, no room that screamed company. Just one cozy bedroom for her with a view of the water, fresh flowers on the nightstand, and a small desk where she could read or draw. She spent the first afternoon exploring every corner, then joined me on the screen porch with lemonade I had made from real lemons, not the powdered kind I used to buy in bulk for their house. That night, after we grilled salmon on the dock and watched the sunset, she finally asked the question I knew was coming. "Dad says you hate us now, that you took everything away because Mom called you a name. Is that true?" I set my glass down and looked at her directly, the same steady gaze I had used in every courtroom. "I don't hate anyone, Sophie. Not your dad, not your mom, not even the version of myself that let it go on for so long. What happened is simple. For 12 years I gave them money because I thought it was love. They took it because it was easier than standing on their own. When I finally stopped, they tried to take the rest by force, changing locks, forging papers, trying to have me declared incompetent. The court stopped them. That's all." She was quiet for a long time, swinging her legs off the edge of the dock. "Mom cried a lot after the judge said she had to go to prison. Dad lost his job. We had to move into a smaller apartment. Sometimes there's no hot water." My heart tightened, but I kept my voice even. I'm sorry you're going through that, but those are consequences, sweetheart, not punishment from me. Your parents made choices. Now they're learning to live with them. You will never go without what you need. The trust I set up will cover your education and some extras when you're older. But it can't be used to bail them out. That money is yours, not theirs. Sophie nodded slowly. I told Dad I wanted to see you. He got mad, but he let me come. He said maybe if I talked to you, you'd change your mind about the money. I smiled without bitterness. And what do you think? She looked out at the dark water. I think you already changed your mind. About a lot of things. And maybe that's okay. The rest of the week was gentle. We baked cookies, rented a kayak, stayed up late watching old movies, and talked about everything except Derek and Vanessa. On the last night, she hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. Can I come back next summer? She whispered. Every summer if you want, I said. And you can call or text anytime. This is your safe place. No strings, no ledger. When her bus pulled away the next morning, I stood in the parking lot waving until it disappeared. Then I drove home, opened a bottle of good champagne I had bought in Vienna, and toasted the empty porch swing. To boundaries, I said aloud, and to the granddaughter who might actually learn what real love looks like. The restitution payment started arriving the following month. $800 wired into the designated account like clockwork. Derek had found warehouse work. Vanessa, out on early parole for good behavior, was cleaning offices at night. The money was never late. The court made sure of that. I never touched it for myself. Every cent went straight into a high-yield savings account earmarked for Sophie and her younger brother, Ethan. Let their parents see the irony. The same hands that once filled their accounts were now building something they could never reach. By early fall, I had settled into a rhythm that felt almost luxurious in its simplicity. Mornings on the porch with coffee and the newspaper. Afternoons tending the small garden I had planted, tomatoes, herbs, nothing that required a second mortgage. Evenings reading or calling Louise or Sophie. No emergencies, no guilt, no walking checkbook. One crisp October afternoon, the phone rang with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. It was Derek. Mom, it's me. I know I'm not supposed to call, but the lawyer said restitution discussions are allowed. I wanted to say thank you for letting Sophie visit. She came back different, calmer. She even started helping around the apartment without being asked. I stayed silent, letting him speak. He continued, voice rough. I know we don't deserve it, but if there's any way, any small way you could help with the rent this month, just until I get my next paycheck. I cut him off, gently but firmly. Derek, the restitution is being paid on time. That's the only financial conversation we will ever have again. Sophie has my number. Ethan can have it when he's old enough. You and Vanessa do not. The cottage has one bedroom. There is no guest room, no spare key, and no space on the porch for anyone who still sees me as an ATM. I love you both as the children I raised, but I no longer finance the adults you became. That chapter is closed. The line was quiet for a long moment. I understand, he said finally, sounding smaller than I had ever heard him. I really do this time. Then we're done here, I replied. Take care of yourself. And take care of those kids. I hung up without waiting for more. That night, I sat on the porch longer than usual, wrapped in the same cashmere throw from the cruise. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting a sky full of stars. I thought about the woman who once canceled her own hip surgery to cover someone else's car payment. I thought about the cake I baked for an anniversary I was never invited to celebrate properly. I thought about the word leech and how it had finally stopped stinging. Then I opened my notebook to the very last blank page and wrote, Final entry. I gave 12 years and $187,412 trying to buy love that could never be purchased. I took back my peace, my home, my future, and my name. The restitution checks still come every month, a quiet reminder that the law finished what I started. My grandchildren know a grandmother who says yes to visits and no to exploitation. My son and daughter-in-law are learning, slowly and painfully, how to stand on their own feet. And I? I am 69 years old, living on a quiet lake with a paid-off cottage, a full retirement account, and a heart that no longer keeps score. I am no longer the walking checkbook. I am simply Margaret. And that is more than enough. I closed the notebook for the last time, set it on the shelf beside the window, and poured myself one more glass of wine. The loons called across the water, wild, free, and completely unburdened. I raised my glass to them, to Robert, to Sophie, and most of all, to the woman who finally learned the most expensive lesson of all. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone is to stop paying. The first snow of the season fell softly on the lake the week before Christmas. I woke to a world wrapped in white, the dock dusted like powdered sugar, the pines heavy with silence. For the first time in decades, I had nowhere I had to be, and no one I had to rescue. I made a single cup of coffee, carried it to the screened porch, and sat wrapped in the cashmere throw watching the flakes drift down. The restitution payment had cleared the night before, $800 on schedule, like every month since the court order. I transferred it immediately into the grandchildren's trust without even opening the email confirmation. The ledger was no longer mine to balance. My phone, still the private number only Sophie, Ethan, and Louise knew, buzzed once. A text from Sophie. "Grandma, it snowed here too. Dad says we can't afford a tree this year. Can I send you a picture of the one I drew instead?" I smiled and typed back, "Send it. And tell your dad the trust will cover one modest tree and lights next year if he wants, but only if he lets you pick it out yourself. Love you." No offer to wire money, no emergency bailout, just clear, kind boundaries wrapped in love. She sent the drawing seconds later, a crooked pine with bright red ornaments and a star that looked like it had been colored by pure hope. I printed it, taped it to the fridge, and felt something warm settle in my chest that had nothing to do with guilt. That afternoon, I drove into town for the first time in weeks. The little main street was strung with lights, shop windows glowing. I bought myself a new wool coat, deep forest green, soft as a cloud, and didn't check the price once. Then I stopped at the bookstore and picked up 3 novels I had been meaning to read since the cruise. No one called to ask why I was spending money on myself. No one needed me to turn around and buy groceries for their empty fridge. Back at the cottage, I lit the fireplace, poured a glass of the good Cabernet, and opened the first book. The snow kept falling outside, quiet and steady, like the universe itself had decided to give me permission to rest. On Christmas Eve, Sophie video called from her small apartment. The background was modest, a tiny artificial tree with the lights she had picked out using the modest allowance from the trust. Derek hovered in the doorway, looking thinner but steadier. He didn't speak to me directly. He just gave a small nod when Sophie turned the camera toward him. "Grandma, look! We have hot chocolate and everything," she said, holding up a mug. "Dad got a bonus at the warehouse. Not a lot, but enough for Coco." "I'm proud of you both," I told her, meaning it. "For making it through. For learning." She beamed. Ethan, now 10, waved from the background, holding a handmade card that said, "For Grandma Maggie," in careful block letters. I promised to visit them in the spring. Neutral ground, one afternoon, no money exchanged. They agreed. After the call ended, I stepped onto the porch. The snow had stopped. The lake was a perfect mirror under a sky full of stars. I raised my glass toward the water. "To the woman who finally said no," I whispered. "And to the life that began the moment she did." The wind moved gently through the pines, carrying the faint sound of distant carols from across the lake. I thought about the anniversary cake I once baked for $340. I thought about the changed locks, the forged signature, the courtroom days when I sat straighter than I ever had in my life. I thought about every dollar I had given and every piece of myself I had taken back. None of it had been wasted. It had simply been the long, expensive tuition for the most important degree I would ever earn: self-respect. I went inside, turned off the lights except for the small lamp by the window, and climbed into bed with one of the new books. No one needed the heat turned up because their pipes might freeze. No one needed me to stay awake in case of a midnight emergency text. For the first time in 12 years, Christmas morning would belong entirely to me. And when spring came, I would plant flowers along the path to the dock. Bright, stubborn blooms that required nothing but water and sunlight, and the quiet decision to grow exactly where they were planted. I closed my eyes and smiled into the darkness. The old Maggie, the walking ATM, the silent provider, the woman who confused love with money, had been laid to rest with dignity. In her place stood Margaret Harlan, 69, solvent, bounded, and beautifully, fiercely free. The snow kept falling outside, soft and forgiving, covering the old footprints I no longer needed to follow. And somewhere deep inside, where the heaviest chains used to live, there was only quiet, only peace, only the sound of a woman, finally, breathing for herself.